Don't adjust your screen. It's just me. Want to find out why I'm sitting on a tilt? Stay tuned to find out. Hello everyone, Coach Chris here with WolfMoon Brewing. Time again for Question of the Week. This week I'm going to answer a question that I've seen posted on Facebook groups, forums, Reddit, a couple of different locations. It's been asked in a couple of different ways, but it boils down to really one thing. How do I know when my beer is done fermenting and ready to be packaged? Well, there's only one way to be sure, and that's to take the specific gravity of your beer and make sure that it has stayed stable for 3 to 4 days and is within a point or two of the calculated final gravity of your recipe and the yeast you're using. So how do I, as a home brewer, know when to start taking my specific gravity to see that it's stabilized for the 3 or 4 days? Well, first off, you don't want to be measuring it every day. That's just an invitation for an infection or for some loss of beer that is unwarranted. So first off, the easiest way, just wait 2 weeks from the day you pitch your yeast. Why 2 weeks, Chris? My experience in the 13 years that I've been brewing, 2 weeks is normally more than enough time for the yeast to do its job and to fully ferment your beer. Once the 2 weeks is up, take your specific gravity measurements for 3 straight days in a row. If it's stable and within a point or two of your calculated final gravity, you're good to go and move on to either packaging or long-term storage, whatever the recipe calls for. The other option is you can watch your airlock. As your airlock and it slows down to where you have no activity for 2, 3, 5, 10 minutes, chances are you're pretty close to the end of fermentation. But that's not always a guarantee. You could have a small leak somewhere in your fermentation vessel and you might not have that activity. So that's not a guarantee, but if you've been having activity and now all of a sudden it's slowed down and stopped, that's a good indication that you can start measuring it. Now that you've either waited the 2 weeks or activity in your bubbler has come to a complete stop, how do you take the measurement of your specific gravity? Well, one of the easiest ways is just to open up your fermentation vessel and take your clean and sanitized hydrometer, put it in the vessel and take your measurement. Do that 3 days in a row, 4 days, and make sure it's the same reading. You can take a sample using either a large turkey baster or a beer thief that I've talked about in earlier videos. If you're lucky enough to have a fermentation vessel that has a spigot at the bottom, go ahead and use that to take your sample. Make sure to remove your airlock prior to taking the sample so you don't create a vacuum inside your fermentation vessel and suck whatever liquid is in your airlock into your beer or fermenting wort. Now there's another way that you can measure this without having to open up your fermentation vessel or to watch for activity or to wait 2 weeks before you start. There's multiple different options out there where you put some type of device into your fermentation vessel and it reports back to you what the specific gravity is. I personally have been using for over 2 years, maybe over 3 years now, a Tilt Hydrometer. I've had great success with it and I use that on pretty much every beer that I brew. I have 3 different ones so I can have 3 different fermentation vessels going at the same time, and I can watch each one as they report back to me. I have heard of a lot of people complaining that the Tilt Hydrometer is not very accurate, and I myself can attest that there are some times that it's not the most accurate of readings. I have been able to avoid most accuracy issues by ensuring that I calibrate the Tilt Hydrometer prior to use in distilled water. I then double check that calibration by whatever the hydrometer reading of my wort is before I pitch my yeast. I confirm that the Tilt Hydrometer reads the same. If they're the same, great. If they're not, I recalibrate again. Now, even if the accuracy is a little bit off on the Tilt Hydrometer, I can still track how the fermentation is going and how the specific gravity is dropping. Once the specific gravity levels off at something very close to my calculated final gravity, and it stays there for 3 or 4 days, I know that my beer is done fermenting, and then I can move on with packaging or long-term storage, again, whatever the recipe calls for. However, one thing I always do with my tilt hydrometer is I double check my final gravity with an actual hydrometer. And that measurement is what I document and use as my final gravity. I find my hydrometer to be extremely accurate, and the tilt sometimes is a point or two off. But I don't have to open up my fermentation vessel 3, 4, 5 days in a row to measure my gravity. That's a huge advantage. I don't have to risk getting an infection by opening up the top. I also don't lose beer by having to take samples multiple days in a row. So to wrap up, like I said at the beginning, the only way to be sure that your beer is done fermenting is to measure its specific gravity and ensure that it has stayed stable for 3 or 4 days in a row and is within a point or two of your calculated final gravity based on the recipe and the yeast you're using. You can do it manually using a hydrometer or a refractometer by taking a sample, or you can use one of the many electronic devices that are out there. I personally like and have had great success with the Tilt Hydrometer. I hope that's answered your question and given you some background as to why I believe that's the answer. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. While you're down there, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Hit the bell to be notified anytime I post a new video. And heck, while you're down there, smash the thumbs up button for a like. Remember, home brewing is really fun, but so is drinking responsibly. I'm Coach Chris, and we'll see you next brew.